I think that the conversations around books are more important than when you read them. The reason
Mhm.
why is reading is a very solitary endeavor. When you read, it's very personal. Planning. I think planning is the most important thing. Planning your resources as an individual, not only your time, but your energy. Okay, what is it that I'm trying to achieve from it? And what is it that I can do that no one else is doing? Which I think is the really critical thing. My focus as an individual is can I create and acquire skills that no one else can, and then put the skills together. Experiences happen in your life that shape your perspective, which then
Mm.
make you see books differently. What you need is negative self-talk that then transforms into positive action. Transformation for me.
Well, On, thank you so much for coming on my podcast, The Transformation Journey. And it's been a while since we have been planning to do this. I think that the first time in which I invited you was like on September of last year of 2020, and I am very
Is it
glad.
really?
Yeah, and I am very glad that we could finally get it done. And I want to start. Well, I think that you sort of know how my journey started, inspired by you. But I still want to share it so that also people listening can know how it went. And so in January of 2020, I bought some books in English, and I used to buy only books in Spanish. But I decided to buy some in English, and also by the time on Instagram, on my personal profile, I came to see a 1 minute book review, and I followed it. And then I was inspired to take the leap and start something of my own. I have always wanted to be an entrepreneur in a certain way and to start my own personal projects. And I mean, the Reader Lounge, I think, has been my biggest success until now, and it was inspired by you. So I want to thank you for that. And well, I would like to first start with sort of an introduction to yourself, but I like to do introductions with stories. So I would like you to tell the story of how you started 1 minute book review, and with that story, share stuff about yourself.
Sure. Firstly, thank you so much for having me on. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you so much, and it means so much that you started your journey and was inspired by me, because I feel like as part of the introduction, I think it'll be important for me to understand is that I want people to be inspired by the books that they read and also by the content that I produce. I don't particularly like when they just consume. I like when they do something with it. So a lot to me that you've actually started something and you're keeping up with it. So yeah, my reason for starting 1 minute book review was the fact that I wanted something that I could go to and find a platform that reviews books in a very short and concise way. When I was commuting into work on my first graduate scheme in the UK, I was working for the Governor Finance grad scheme, and I was commuting like 4 hours a day to London and back. And I'll be looking at these book reviews done by major newspapers, and their book reviews would be like, I don't know, a half a page to a
Hmm.
page. And I thought to myself, I don't really particularly want to be digesting this. I want something that's perhaps a bit shorter and a bit more snappy. And at that time, I was having a look at other people that I knew that were making content, and I thought, well, I should try something myself, similar to you when seeing me. And I was like, oh, well, I don't really have an idea. And then in like a spark, I don't know where it came from, I just came up with this idea of 1 minute book review, and I was just like, okay, let's try this. I never thought it was going
Hmm.
to be something or whether I was going to keep it up. But it was just, I had my job and I was doing that and I was studying still, and I just started it. And that was early 2017, and I've been sort of off and on with it. Really, it was only really until 2020 that I really started focusing on it a lot. Before then, I wasn't focusing too much on it. I was sort of to and from. Um, but yeah, since then it's been a bit crazy. I think the last 18 months, really, since the pandemic, I think a lot more individuals are looking for books to read. And since then, we've launched the podcast as well, where we speak with authors every week. And that's been amazing, to be fair. Like, I feel like my strengths are in communicating in that platform. I love Instagram and it's something that I enjoy, but I almost feel like it's just a snapshot. And I love the conversations, and I'm sure you do
Mm,
because you have this podcast as well. So
yeah.
that's a bit of a brief introduction to me as an individual. What I'm currently doing is I'm currently retraining as a software engineer. So I was working in finance, and I'm currently making a switch into software engineering, whilst also running the book review page and also the podcast and the magazine and content. And so the moment's fairly busy at the moment, but
Hmm.
perhaps we can get onto topics such as being a content creator whilst also having a job, and how to manage those both. Might be in conversation as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Let's get into that. So, how do you manage it? Because I mean, I am in school. Well, right now I'm like on holidays and vacations, so it's more easy for me to be productive. Well, with the reader lounge and with the podcast. But I mean, while I am in school, I have to sort of pick two: either school and the reader lounge, or the reader lounge and my podcast, or the podcast and school. Because I mean, it's kind of hard to handle everything. But how do you manage it?
Sure. I mean, I would say it's come in time. I mean, well, like I said, my first graduate scheme, I was working full time. I was working, so as part of that grad scheme, I had to do a professional qualification, and I was also commuting 4 hours a day. So my routine really throughout those 3 or so years is when I'd get up at anywhere between 4 and 4:30. I'd go to the gym. From the gym, I would then drive to the train station, take the train in. On the train in, I would study, do work. On the train back, I would read for an hour and a half, and then I would come home at like 8:39, and I'll just do it again. Needless to say, after 3 years, I was quite fatigued. Let's put it that way, from that routine, and couldn't focus too much on content like casts and stuff, because I just literally did not have the time.
Hmm.
So at the moment, I would say, because I'm working from home and I'm retraining stuff, a bit more extra time. It goes back to the thing about when you read these productivity books and when you read these nonfiction, are you actually taking anything from it? Because the reason why I read these books is so it can help me to do the things that I want to do. I don't
Hmm.
read them for the sake of reading them. So when I read, for instance, like Deep Work by Cal Newport, or I read Indistractable by Nia Eyal, these books that are helping me to construct systems and productivity frameworks for me to allow me to do a job and train
Hmm.
and do a podcast and create content. So I think the first step is to really appreciate the fact that the books are there to help me, rather than me just reading them for the sake of sharing it with others. Because
Hmm.
really selfishly, Emiliano, I read for myself, and content's just there because I feel like people should read them too. I don't share them for the sake of sharing them to get attention for me, because I don't need attention for me as an individual. That's just the way I am. I'm just like, well, this book is cool. I liked it. You should read it too. And these are the
Yeah.
reasons why. So that's my approach. It's never been like, look at me. I read all these books and I'm amazing, because um, that's just not why I do it. That's why I don't particularly want to be an influencer as well.
Hmm.
That's also why I've maintained a job throughout all this, because that's not my goal to be a influencer and do it full time. That's not what I'm going for it. So yeah, that's really how I manage it. It's okay, what are the critical things that I need to do? Okay, I need to have a job. That's really important.
Hmm.
Similar to you, you need to be a student. So construct time, that is time blocking within your calendar, that says, okay, during these periods of time, I am a student and I'm only a student. And then, for instance, if you have a podcast lined up, like I did a couple of weeks ago, I had basically 10 days where I didn't have that much to do. So I was like, okay, within these 10 days, I'm going to schedule 11 podcasts. So I had 11 podcasts during those 10 days where I filmed for maybe 3.5, 4 months worth of podcasts. So now for the next 10 weeks or 12 weeks, I don't have to worry about producing content. I've got podcasts lined
Hmm.
up. So it's being a lot more forward looking. It's saying, okay, I have 5 days in September that I can film. Okay, let's try and organize these 5 podcasts, these 5 authors in those 5 days. And then that will be content going up into December or the end of the year. So it's being a lot more organized, and it's
Hmm.
taken me a lot of time. Like, I'm 28, Emiliano. I don't know how old you are. I'm sure you're in your late
16.
teens, but
Yeah.
it's, yeah, 16. Yeah, exactly. So the fact that you're doing this is amazing to me anyway, because like when I was 16, I wasn't even thinking about this kind of stuff. To you for that. So
Thanks.
I would say it's a lot more forward planning. So when you're constructing a content schedule, or whether you're constructing a study schedule, it's have 3 months in mind, minimum. That's what I tend to do, and I think that's really important as a starting point. If you don't have that starting point, it's very difficult to plan ahead and maintain a content schedule,
Mm-hmm.
because things happen and things come up. Like I've been dealing with many issues on the back end of my stuff, hard drives and all kinds of crap. So it's having a lead time and having a buffers is very important if things go wrong. So that's really important, and also the appreciation, Emiliano, that things do take priority sometimes. Like your studies will take priority. I don't know if you've seen, but I perhaps haven't been posting as much as I used to do in
Yeah.
the last
Mhm.
couple of months. So that's really just because that's just not my focus at the moment. My focus at the moment is my retraining program, which I'm dedicating a lot of time to at the moment. It's basically like a part-time job on top of my normal job, on top of all the other stuff that I do as well. So it's a lot of hours. So I would say there's also an appreciation for that as well. It's like, okay, in this, really, for me now, leading up until the beginning of September, it's going to be focused on that. So really the main thing that I really want to talk about in reference to this is planning. I think planning is the most important thing. Planning your resources as an individual, not only your time but your energy. So knowing what times of day you're best at, and managing your energy over months rather than just a week. Because I think a lot of people just think
Mhm.
in weeks. I kind of have started to think more months. Say, okay, for these 3 weeks, I'm going to be very hard, do 85 plus, and then for the next week or so, I'm going to go more into the 50s or the 40s. So that's really important to know as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to mention a couple of things. Well, a few things here. So, you said before, talking about productivity, that you like to have you like more to have conversations because you find them more valuable. Is that right?
I think that only through a conversation can you really understand a topic,
Mm-hmm.
and also a person as well. So that's why I think conversations are really important. And it really goes back to the point as well, Emiliano, is the fact that when we're having a conversation right now, we're both learning stuff. I think too often people think about who's going to listen. Um, as important it is that people do listen and that you share it, it's also important to understand that each one of us is getting value from the
Mm-hmm.
conversation, because we're both learning something from each other. So just the value of a conversation is really important, which is something that I value a lot more than I think I did in the past, before I had the podcast.
Yeah. Do you know who Glow at Tanmo is?
No.
Well, I think she's like community manager or a marketing expert or something, but the point is that she talks about how Instagram and TikTok, mainly for example, are platforms which are like when you use them, it is like consuming fast food. And when you listen to a podcast or watch a YouTube video or something which isn't just like quickly stimulating you, it is more about the learning you have and the experience. It is about like actually consuming stuff that is better for you, and that's something that I have noticed with your content. That and it is also some, well, yeah, something for which I respect you a lot, because your content, even though you do not post daily, is very valuable. When you post like good reviews and good book recommendations, and don't just post like a picture of your bookshelf for the sake of posting it. And that is sort of what I have been trying to do, especially like to balance stuff and again to be more productive. I try to set times to create content and say like, okay, this day I'm gonna post a reel about this certain subject, and the next day I'm not gonna post anything, and the next one a book review. And so I try to post value, not just post for the sake of posting. And with my podcast, I have struggled a lot with consistency and with planning, because um, I think it was like maybe 3 or 2 months ago, when I had a list of people who I wanted to interview and who I already was chatting with, including you, for example. But because of different things, I couldn't do the 11. I think the 11 interviews, and stuff didn't go as planned. And I mean, it was a mess, basically. But yeah, I think I am trying like now to focus on, okay, when do I interview people, and when do I focus on posting and editing and all that. And I think the part with which I struggle the most is, well, with my podcast, is knowing new people to interview. So you interview mostly or basically authors, right? And
Only.
yeah, and you already have read their books.
Yeah.
So do you only base who are you gonna interview in the books that you have read, or do you plan on interviewing someone and then reading their book?
So at the moment, I'm very fortunate because there's a couple of publishers that send me free books. So both
Mm-hmm.
Penguin and Bloomsbury, who are both in the UK. So they send me books, and I know the marketing managers now personally. So if there's a book, for instance, that's coming out in September, then they'll send me the book. As you can see, I've got like a stack
Yeah.
here. That's the books that they've sent me. So I'm very fortunate, really, Emiliano. I can't believe it's only really been a year since I've focused on it. And in a year, it seems like I've just, interviewed some amazing people and got sent some really cool books. So that's one part of it, is they sent me books and they say, okay, look, that post it kind of thing, and we'll arrange for the authors to come on the podcast. So it's really helpful for me because it's content. It's
Mm-hmm.
content for the 1 Minute Book Review channel, because then I can post a picture and share it. And it's also content for my YouTube channel, because then I can make a personal YouTube video about it. And then it's also a podcast, so it's also an hour. So like the way I think about it now is like an ecosystem. So do you know how Apple has the
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem? I think about myself as the ecosystem. So I've got
Nice.
myself as the brand. Let's say I've got my own YouTube channel. I have my newsletter kind of thing, but I also have 1 Minute Book Review, which is like book reviews and photos. But I also have a podcast, which is like long form. So my thing is like, I want the short, I want the medium, and I want the long. I want
Mm-hmm.
like everything. I want photos, I want clips, I want long form. I just want everything to come under like a triangle of me,
Uh-huh.
uh, without sounding really egotistical. So it's like understanding where it fits. Where does everything fit into that? Which requires a lot of planning, but also requires time. I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
this has taken a long time for me to format this. When I started, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just posting
Mm-hmm.
this and that and this and that. And I've really sort of delved into like, okay, what is it that I'm trying to achieve from it? And what is it that I can do that no one else is doing? Which I think is the really critical thing, because I've seen really in the past 2 or 3 months, people doing exactly what I was doing 3, 4, 5 months ago. And that's a sign for me that I need to go and do something else, because I
Mm-hmm.
know that whatever I'm going to do, everyone else is doing, which is not going to separate me. So at that point, it's important to take space and think, okay, what am I trying to do with this? And what else can I do to separate myself? Really, when I think about it, for me personally, the only thing that separates me is my personal knowledge and my ability to communicate. That's why I've focused on the Sunday lives, that I
Mm-hmm.
haven't really missed. Only really a week or two ago, I was away for the weekend. So unfortunately I missed that, but I've pretty much done a live every single week now for over a year and haven't really missed it, because I know that that value is really important, for the community, because anyone can post a book and not answer a
Mm-hmm.
question, but it really takes someone to sit in front of a camera, not knowing who's going to be on the other end, and they're going to ask you any question and you're not prepared, and whether you can answer it. That tests many different facets of communication and knowledge and all that kind of stuff anyway. But that's really important, because that can't be replicated by anyone else. No one can sit in front of a screen and be me. That's just
Mm-hmm.
me. In the same way that when I do a podcast, no one can replace me as the podcast host, because I have a certain set of knowledge, I have a certain way of communicating, and I've built up a following and a base of individuals that associate me with being this,
Mm-hmm.
which you can't replicate with buying followers, or you just can't replicate it. That's just the individuality of content creation. So yeah, when it comes to the value, like you were saying earlier, I think that's the only thing I focus on, Emiliano. Is what I'm putting out valuable? If it's not, I don't post it. If it is,
Hmm.
I post it. It's really that simple, because I don't want to post for the sake of it. Because I mean, what the whole point is, if it's not valuable, then why am I doing it? If it's
Hmm.
not valuable to me or to you or to anyone who consumes it, why am I doing it? And I know there's a lot of individuals that post the same books every single day, and it's just like, why? Just the whole point of for me, the whole point of it is to share books that no one has read before, not to get likes for books that are popular that people have already read. Like, what's the point? The whole point is to share information that people haven't read
Hmm.
before. I mean, that's the whole point of it. So that's my focus. And whether it gets 200 likes or whether it gets, I don't really care. Like, I honestly do not care. The whole point for me is to share information with individuals that are looking, and that's the really critical thing, that is looking for new information and that they can learn from. Whether they want to do it or not is a whole different thing.
Hmm.
And that then goes into the whole social media usage and everything, and whether people actually want to make the change or whether they just feel like they are making the change. But that's not for me to comment. The only thing that I can control is the value that I put out. And that's what I keep as the North Star.
Hmm. Yeah, that's sort of what I try to also to do, because I I think I got into a moment, into a stage of the reader lounge in which I was only posting for the sake of posting and growing. And I well, there are many accounts, not in the Bookstagram niche specifically, but in like the business niche and all that, which teach how to grow and how to hack the algorithm and all that. And what I have seen, and I think that's sort of also inspired by you, is that my page has grown into 10,000 audience members because I have posted consistently valuable stuff during 1.5 year, and that has been great. And in the part of like differentiation, I am liking that many books, well, not many, but a few Bookstagram accounts are now like focusing on also doing community stuff. So, for example, Book Thinkers, they are still focusing on their business of promoting books and everything, but they created a mastermind group, interviewing authors and many people. So I think that's great, and that is a way to add more value, and in a way in which it is more about internalizing and not just quickly consuming, and also get better with books. He's creating his YouTube channel and he's doing many giveaways, and I like that. Me, well, right now I am just focusing on producing content for Instagram and with the podcast for YouTube and for podcasting platforms. But I might start something. Well, maybe a book club. I know you have a book club. Maybe I will start a book club or something in the future to like engage more with the community. And I think in one point of the last year, I asked you that how do you monetize your page, and you
I
told me
don't.
not. Yeah, exactly. And you told me not to focus on monetizing it, to focus on adding value, and that afterwards I could maybe focus on how to monetize it. And I think that is what I have done. Basically, I have been focusing on adding value, and now I am starting to focus on also on how can I like get value, how can I create something from that, not just post content for the sake of it. So when and why did you start doing book clubs?
I think it was the conversation. So we've been done the book club. It was under 1 Minute Book Review. It was under me for a while, and then when I created the podcast and magazine, I kind of moved it over there. So when you subscribe to the magazine, you get access to the book club.
Mhm.
The reason why is I think that the conversations around books are more important than when you read them. The reason
Mhm.
why is reading is a very solitary endeavor. When you read, it's very personal and you take information from it. But in the process of doing so, sometimes you might miss critical information because you are coming from a certain perspective. So when you and I read a certain type of book, you might have a completely different perspective and learn something from the information that I might not have seen. So in the discussion that we will have about the book, you might bring up something that I have no idea about and I can then learn from. And then likewise, you might learn something that I say, but that can't happen if you just read solely. And that's why I think the purpose of a book club is, and that's why I
Mm-hmm.
love it. We've been doing it now consistently, and I've sort of taken a little break from it because, like I said, the next few months are very focused for me on other things. But it's one of those things for me that I think is incredibly valuable for anyone that's willing to put the time and effort into it. There is, I want to say, a dichotomy sometimes between the willingness to do it and the ability to show up. That's
Mm-hmm.
just been my experience. I think a lot of people love the idea of it, but they don't particularly like doing it. So that sometimes can be a bit challenging when you've got a book club and you have 7, 8 people signed up and just like 2 turn up just because they have like
Mm-hmm.
late showing. So that's a bit difficult. So yeah, I mean, a book club is a book club at the end of the day. And I think the thing to really understand is like, with a book club, what is the aim of it? Is it just to discuss the book itself, or is it to discuss the ideas around the book? Is it to have a discussion about the principles, the ideas, or is it more personal experience? So I would say my experience has been, if I was to do it again, I would probably try and understand what the frequency of the book club would want to be, and get that nailed down, and also understand who and the types of people that you'd like to get on. I think being selective is very important from my
Mm-hmm.
experience,
Mm-hmm.
because I've had some individuals that I perhaps should have vetted before. So that's just the way it is. Like anything, you just have to manage. Trying to manage that is very difficult as a content creator, but yeah, it just comes in
Mm-hmm.
time. It comes
Yeah.
in time, I guess.
In January, I created a book club. I mean, it was a free book club, because it was the anniversary of the Reader Lounge, and like maybe 30 people registered to participate in it. But then only like 6 people showed up. But those 6 people were like, I would say, wise people. We had a great conversation, and with 3 of them, I have developed. Well, actually, with four, with all of them, I have developed like a good connection, a
Yeah.
connection that even though I do not know them like physically, it is like great to have them as a friend, yeah, as friends and as people I can talk to. But I actually am looking for ways to, yeah, to monetize the Reader Lounge, because I want to start to learn a little about, to gain experience about like having an actual business, so that in the future I can like know more. But still I want to focus like on the part of adding value. And have people reached out to you, asking if you could post in your story if people needed an e-reader like Kindle or something.
If I told you how many messages I get a day, Emiliano, you'd probably laugh. But I reject every single one. I haven't done one paid promotion. I haven't done one paid story. I haven't done one paid post
Hmm.
ever on my page, and I don't particularly plan to. When it comes to the business side of this content creation, I think it's really important to understand what your goal with it is. Like my goal isn't to, like I said before, my goal is not to be in that space. There's other individuals in the Bookstagram world that promote all types of books. They don't particularly care what type of book it is. They'll just
Hmm.
post it because they know they're getting paid for it. That's not what I do.
Hmm.
That's not me, because the whole point for me is like, and and this is really interesting about the point of integrity, because any book that you post is a reflection upon yourself. It's not just something that you get paid for or that you advocate for. Anything that you post is a um what's the best word, is an indication of who you are as an individual. So I take that very seriously. I don't want to post a book that I don't particularly reflect my
Hmm.
personality or who I am as an individual, because that doesn't reflect upon me very well. So that's why I don't do paid promotions, because most of the books that get sent to me are just complete rubbish. So I don't want to don't want to do it. Like I just, and that's me being honest, Emiliano. My goal, like I said, is not to be a quote unquote influencer. I still have a job. I have other goals when it comes to my career that's not related to this. For instance, like I said, I'm retraining to be a software engineer. I want to build apps. I want to work in companies that are building applications so that I can do that as a career, because I feel like that will give me more of a chance to be financially successful than if I was just to do this. Like, and I feel like it's more picking up the pennies for, let's say, doing promotions. If someone was to pay me £50 for a book, it's like, okay, they pay me £50, but it's like, that doesn't reflect upon me very well. So it's sort of that long-term, short-term mindset. I had someone who wanted me to promote their book, and they were going to give me, I think, like £150 or something. Fairly low, I would consider, for a reflection upon me as an individual, because I hold my self-esteem quite high, not in an egotistical way, just more out of self-respect. And I read the book, and it was total rubbish. Like, I was just like, this is going nowhere close to my name. And so I just rejected it. And some people say, oh, it doesn't matter, like, I get the money. But like, for instance, there's been authors that have sent me their books for free, and I don't accept any payment. They send it to me to free, and I usually just do a review, or I have them on the podcast. And some of them, most of them, have turned out to be my friends. Like, there's one author in the UK called Will Stall, one of my favorite authors. I loved all of his books. He's now a friend of mine, and he's got a new book coming out in September, which he sent me, which is here. It doesn't even have a cover on it. It's a pre-published version. And he sent me the book to let me know my thoughts, and he's coming on the podcast in September. You would have told me a year ago that that would have happened, and I would have been like, you have to be joking me. But I honestly think Emiliano is because I don't expect anything from them. Like, I don't say to them, look, I'm only going to post your book if you pay me X amount of money, because that my goal is to create relationships with individuals. It's not just to take their money, because what is that at the end of the day? It's not the goal of what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to pick up the pieces of something that I don't think is what I want to do. So I think it's important for me to caveat this, is that I don't think one way is right or wrong. I think it's important to understand what your goal is. If your goal is to get experience about how to run a business online, then I totally understand why you'd go down that avenue, but that's not my personal goal, which is why I don't do it. So it's important for me to caveat after that long explanation that I don't think it's right or wrong, quote unquote. I think it's important to understand what your goal is, and then act in that way. That's why I just don't do promotions or promote any. Like, some people send me messages, I mean, and they're so rude. Like, honestly, they're so rude. And they say to me, you should promote my page. I'm new. You should promote my page. I'm like, who are you? Like,
Exactly.
why?
I
I
get
mean,
those messages too.
I mean, it's hard enough to promote yourself, let alone someone else. So yeah, no, you can go take your promotion, insert unnecessary swear word. But yeah, I think it's important to understand what your goal is, and then act accordingly.
So I almost 1 year ago, I had on my podcast as my first guest, Nick from Book Thinkers, and he has become a good friend of mine.
Mm.
And I asked him, because I was starting, like, again, coming from the idea of learning how to do a business, how to, yeah, basically that. And I asked him, how did he monetize Book Thinkers? And he told me about promotions and all that, and I started doing them. But until some months ago, I have noticed that it's not something for me. It is not something sustainable. It is not really something I believe in, and I want to share how it has been with me. So I used to do paid promotions with authors who I reached because their books seemed interesting for me. And for example, there is a book called Getting Naked. It is about entrepreneurship and startups, but also about personal development. And I mean, it was a paid promotion, but it has become one of my favorite books. And I had the author on the podcast. I have developed a great connection with him. I would even consider him my mentor. I gave more value than what I said I would give to him, like for the deal, for the sale of the promotion. And I mean, that's sort of what I have noticed. There are certain books which I would like to uh, make a deal with the authors for, and I know that I can provide more value than what I say to them that I will provide, because there is this company, Bookstar PR. And it was founded by a friend, mentor I have, and his name is Brant Meswer. Do you know him? His book is
Yeah.
called Black Sheep. Yeah, so he published his book on October of the last year, and he now, the way in which he did marketing for his book was sending a copy of the book to many Bookstagram accounts. He sent one to me. I didn't charge or anything, and that way he became a best-selling author. And I think that because of that experience, he and his partner created a company called Bookstar PR, which is a marketing company for authors. And what they do is that they send books to different bookstagrammers who have a certain amount of followers, for example me, and they do pay because, I mean, that's their business. And until now, with the books that they have sent me, I have provided, I think, the value, more value than what I promised, but also I have done it with books in which I believe, because I believe in the business of Bookstore PR more on the business that I have on doing all myself, because I know that what they are doing is actually helping their authors. And
Mm.
if I was to publish a book, I would probably go with them. And so I think that is an important part. But because of all this, and because I don't see much profit, but also I don't see much value in the promotions, is why I am trying to look for new ways to innovate in the books and reading industry. Because there are the reason why I asked you about people contacting you to ask you if you could do a poll on your story and ask if people need new e-readers as Kindle, was because I get many of those messages of people with startups wanting to create yeah, gadgets as Kindle. But I don't really think that is the way to innovate in this industry, because there aren't many ways to, like, to innovate with a book. I think we can innovate with the experience, and it is sort of what you're doing with 1 minute book review, and with your podcast, and with the book clubs, because you are, like, creating new ways of engaging with a community of readers, and of adding more value so that we can all progress or reach our individual goals. It's like a mastermind. And yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
You unpacked a lot there, Emiliano. Going back to Nick specifically, I don't particularly think that um, that way of promoting books is the best.
Yeah, me neither.
Because the issue that I have with it is it's not about the books itself, it's about him as the individual. And perhaps that's just a clash of personalities, but I don't particularly agree with that sentiment, or because the books and the ideas are foremost. It's not me as the individual, it's not the author, even it's not really the author themselves. And I think that goes back to the nature of the types of books that you're promoting. Is it about the brand of the individual author, or is it about the ideas and principles inside of it? So that's what I really look for. And that's why if you look at my podcast, I really try my hardest to get certain types of it. I just don't get anyone. Like, there's a certain type of individual that's going to come on my podcast, and there's a certain type of individual who's going to come nowhere near. They're going to come nowhere near Emiliano, trust me. And I can think of many, many individuals that are going to come nowhere close. So I think that's really important, to have integrity in what your goal is and what your vision is, and also to understand the time frame. Like, I mean, I want to be interviewing authors really into the future. I don't really have a time frame. Like, I just want to be speaking with authors, and if they have a really interesting book, I want to be speaking with them, whether it lasts for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. I don't particularly care. Like, I can really see myself speaking to authors until the day that I pass. So I don't particularly care if it I don't yeah, I don't care if one podcast gets 200 listens, another one gets 5,000. Like, these things don't particularly matter to me. That's the point I'm trying to make. Is more, it's like, okay, do you feel like you're making progress towards the individual that you want to become, and that the systems around you are lending to that way? Because my personal opinion, I've spoken to my granddad a lot. I would consider he's my mentor. is he came from post partitioned India. So when India in the 1940s, it was partitioned, and then the Muslims in India were driven up into what is now known Pakistan, and also Bangladesh as well. And he basically had nothing. His family was killed, and then he basically got educated. He became the top student in his school, got a scholarship to the UK, did a scholarship here, moved to Saudi Arabia, did very well, entrepreneur, business.
Mm-hmm.
And he always says to me, he's like, don't chase money.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like 85, 86, and he's like, just don't. And I'm like, well, if my granddad, who's done well from nothing, is giving me advice, I'm going to take his advice over anyone else who's quote unquote in this influential space, because I'll listen to my granddad over anyone else because I know what he's been through. So my goal is not to chase immediate returns, because I know that's going to come in time. If you're the best at what you do and you are creating a niche and something that no one else is doing, the value's there, then the monetization is going to happen over time. But I feel like when you make short term, and I think this is just a business principle, when you make a short term, when you do short term strategies in order to maximize wealth, it's not sustainable. And you want sustainability, you don't want
Mm-hmm.
immediate returns, which goes back into many different principles of psychology, whether it be delayed gratification or in business when it comes to sustainability and profitability. So that's really my main thing. I don't really know where I was going with that. I think you just wanted my comments on the things that you were talking about. You mentioned also the fact that you want to maintain integrity in the types of books that promoting. So you said that
Mm-hmm.
when you produced content, you were giving more value. That's really important. And that's definitely something that I associate with. I want the ideas that come out of my mouth and also out of the podcast as well to be the ideas that people can find value from, which is very important. But my general sentiment is most of the books that are being published now in the space of business or entrepreneurship specifically are more around how an individual is right rather than tried and true principles. So, for instance, if you look at a book like The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, it talks about principles of how to grow a startup from scratch. Another one being 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. Those books are like in science, you have this idea of first principles. So it talks about the
Mm-hmm.
ideas about how to create a business and the steps to go do it. Whereas I feel like a book that's being promoted individually is more about an individual story. So it's important to understand that as the reader. Okay, do you want like an individual story, or do you want like principles? Which has been my experience. And like I said, there is a certain type of individual that I do talk to and that I don't talk to, and that I do read and that I don't read. And I think that's also important to talk about, is you don't have to read everything that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
You have the freedom to read what you want. Like loads of people send me messages. It's like, you should read that. You should read that. You should read that. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to read that. I have a limited amount of time on this earth to read a certain type of number of books. I'm only going to read the ones that interest me and I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious to learn about, not ones that I feel like I should read,
Mm-hmm.
which is a whole different topic, which I think is very interesting in this space, because I feel like people are forced to read a certain type of book, because if they don't, they won't be successful in whatever way that they think they'll be successful of when they'll read the book. And that's just not the case.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not the case. So yeah, don't feel pressured to read a book just because someone tells you to, me included, by the way. I want to caveat that just because I'm saying you should read a book doesn't necessarily mean that you should. I try my hardest in my reviews to say who a book's for and who a book isn't for, which is why the type of reviews that I do, rather than rating it out of an arbitrary measure of 1 to 5 stars, because that's just not valuable. I try and say, okay, who's this book for and who's this book not for? So if the book's not for you, don't read it. If it's for you
Mm-hmm.
or you're interested, read it. It's really that simple.
Yeah,
And
simple.
that's why I try and promote.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask you, how do you pick your next read? But I just want to mention that I I don't know if I might be sounding like I focus a lot on profit, but I really don't. I mean, I do focus like on starting to have an income and to have profit and all of that. But I like business because I like business. I have been enjoying or dreaming about becoming an entrepreneur since I was like 9 years old, and I think I was mostly influenced by my dad. But I mean, I look at someone like Richard Branson, and I admire him a lot. He started being an entrepreneur around my age, and I like what he does. He does provide value. He has fun. I mean, these things sort of inspire me. I like to read
Yeah,
business books because I like the process of creating something of value and trying it and testing it and seeing if it will be successful or not. And that's
sure.
why I also want to focus on business, like not to, because one thing is just to add value and another to add value through a business. And I think I prefer more like adding value through a business, but not for the sake of money, but like for the sake of the experience, which is cool. But
Sure.
yeah.
So on that point, my experience is like from someone who I did a graduate scheme where I studied finance, so it was a finance grad scheme. So I worked in government departments and I learned about how they manage money and that kind of stuff. And I've done some different roles, whether they be business analyst or finance analyst. My experience as being Emiliano is your own individual experience is really important when running a business, but it's also important to see how other people do it and to be within the frame of on the ground, in the ground, seeing
Mhm.
how other people run a business. Because you also understand how not to do it, which has been my experience a lot. You see how someone's doing it, you're like, wait, because this is a really interesting thing about reading books and experiencing it is the fact that you read a book like, for instance, on communication, and then you have a manager that is a terrible communicator and is just an awful human being to be around, and you're like, well, that's what they're doing wrong. What's what someone else is doing right. If they're very successful, you're like, okay, cool, they're doing all those things. That's why they're successful. That's why I'm in the position. I'm going to be like them. But I'm personally like I'm not in a particular rush to be. Um, you know, I create content, I create value similar to the way you do, but I think that I'm in no particular rush to then make it into like a thing, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like my focus as an individual is can I create and acquire skills that no one else can, and then put the skills together. That's something really fascinating for me is the idea that, okay, I am a content creator. I read all these books, but I also have experience in finance. I also am now going to be a software engineer, so I can create systems, I can create algorithms, I can create all these types of things, whether they be applications, web applications, mobile applications. I don't know where that's going to go, but it's more the skills behind it. Like, do you have the skills behind it in order to do something that no one else can do, which really is the most valuable thing, because you don't know what idea is you don't know the ideas that you're going to have in
Mhm.
5-10 years, but do you have the skills in order to implement the idea once it comes? That's
Mhm.
a whole different ball game. So that's my focus. It's like, okay, do I have the necessary skills? That's just my focus. And I think your approach is important because you are knowing what you want. My thing to you would be like, get the skills that Richard Branson has.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, like get the
Yeah.
skills. He is a fantastic communicator and salesperson. Like, I don't think there's anyone better. He makes something that's incredibly difficult seem very easy, and that's when you know
Yeah.
someone's great at what they do. So yeah, find out what the skills behind him are, um, and then that's why I don't want to be anyone else. Like, there's a lot of people that want to be someone. Like, I don't want to be anyone else.
Mhm.
I want to acquire the skills that other people have in order for them to be the person that they are, which is something completely different. Like, I don't want to be anyone else, apart from Goggins maybe, but that's a whole different thing. I think
Yeah.
everyone wants a part of Goggins in them. So, but then with him, it's like, okay, how can I be more like him rather than how can I be him? It's very subtle difference, but it's very important one. It's like, what are the principles that he lives by, and how can I live by those principles as well?
Yeah. So you do not want to be the next David Goggins. You want to be the first Aun Abdi with skills similar, yeah, with similar skills to skills and traits as David Goggins.
I had this feeling when I was a kid. Like, do you know when you went to school and they would be like, okay, what do you want to be when you're older?
Mhm.
Or who's your idol? More importantly, people like, who's your idol? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like,
Uh-huh.
I really don't know because I don't have an idol that I look up to as an individual. And I always was confused about that question when I was young. I was like, no, I don't have an idol that I'm chasing. Like, I just don't. Like, it just doesn't compute in my mind. What does compute in my mind is the fact that there are individuals that I respect that are good at what they do, that I'm like, what are they doing to be the best, and why are they the best?
Mm-hmm.
And I like to learn about how they have become to be the best that they are, so that I can replicate the processes and systems that they use to become the best for myself, to find out what I actually want to do as well, rather than I want to be like them. That's why, for instance, when someone says, for instance, they did X, Y, and Z to then be the person that they are, I'm like, okay, that is their individual journey. That's
Mm-hmm.
the steps they took. Just because you replicate the steps they took doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get to the position they are. But what was a famous thing at the moment, or a very contemporary example, is like, is it mind maps, or what is it, mental models? So like, what are
Mm-hmm.
the mental models that they're using in order to get to the position, which is more important than the steps that they took? Because with technological advancements, you don't know the steps. Like, the steps might change in 2 to 3 years, but the mindsets don't change. So it's trying to figure out the mindsets rather than the steps themselves, which comes back more to self-awareness and understanding yourself, which is more important than anything. I've made a very conscious effort not to consume that much content recently. I don't really listen to podcasts. I don't really watch YouTube videos. Really, I don't really do anything but read books and create content, because
Mm-hmm.
I've found my vehicle for learning. My vehicle for learning is books. I learn a bit from audiobooks, but I really don't really learn from YouTube videos or from podcasts, really. I learn through reading. Uh, so why would I not just read more? Which makes
Mm-hmm.
more sense. Which just comes from understanding yourself. So how do you learn best? That's why when someone asks me on a live Q&A, it's like, which one's better, books, audiobooks, or ebooks? I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, they all are good. They're all good. It's just another vehicle for learning. And if you're learning from it and you're benefiting from it, as long as it's not a book summary or a blink list, I think you're all right. When you go
Mm-hmm.
down the road of blink lists and stuff, I'm like, no, don't do it. Don't do that to yourself, because that's not learning. That's dopamine rush. That's dopamine rush masquerading as learning. It's not the same thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it probably goes down to the fact that reading is very difficult. And if you really want to become a better reader, it's going to take a lot of time. You can't pick up a Dostoevsky. You can't pick up even a Jordan Peterson, a Jung. You can't pick those up and just expect to get it. Like, you just can't. And I think a lot of people just expect that they pick up a book and they'd be like, oh yeah, I got it after first time reading. It's like, even what would be considered to be an easy book like Atomic Habits, that
Mm-hmm.
sold over 2 million copies, you have to read it multiple times to even try and understand what he's trying to say. You can't just read it once, do a couple of highlights, do a couple of notes, and then expect to implement it, because it just doesn't work that way. Uh, Anything doesn't work that way. It takes so much time and effort. Uh, and that's why I think people love the idea of reading rather than reading itself. And I think if you're curious as an individual, then reading will come naturally to you. It's just a part of the process of being curious is wanting to learn, and read books is just the vehicle for me, the best vehicle. I just think it's the
Mm-hmm.
best vehicle for learning. uh, I know other people learn better from other vehicles, whether they be books or podcasts, or sorry, videos or podcasts, or audiobooks. I think they're all great. I don't think one's better than the other, but mine is physical copies.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't replicate what I can learn from a book from anything else.
Yeah, me either. I think that the two sources from which I get the most value, as in learning, are books and podcasts. I do listen to a lot of podcasts. And about what you said, about reading books and hoping to get all the information in the first time reading it. I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius and last year on November, I think, and I thought because it is not a very big book. I thought that I would read it like in a week or something, but it took me like maybe 1 month and a half or something, because it's really information you have to reflect and to digest. It is not something you just read and get in the first time. Even with Atomic Habits, I have read it twice, and I think that, like, on the actual application of what I read, on actually taking action, I have just been able to apply one principle, which is the idea of identity. Yeah, and mostly that principle. But there are, yeah, many books, many easy reads which aren't that easy.
They're
That's
not
it.
easy. No,
Yeah.
and a no book is quote unquote easy to read. Some are more difficult than others. I think
Hmm.
some are difficult to the degree that the language or the concept is difficult. So if you think of like a Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, that took me 3 months to get through. I was reading it. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm really trying my hardest to get through it. And I was being really patient. I wasn't giving up on it because I really wanted to read it. I found it really interesting, but I'm like, I need to take some time with this because I don't understand it. 12 Rules for Life, the first time I read it, it took me a long, long time. His first book, Maps of Meaning, that was ridiculous. Like that took me, I don't know how long that took me. I still am getting around the trauma of reading it the first time. But there are some books I think that I have on a circuit that I read, if not every 6 months, every sort of year, if not to refresh, because
Hmm.
things. And the thing is, Emiliano, is experiences happen in your life that shape your perspective, which then
Hmm.
make you see books differently. So that's why it's important to revisit, and have a set of books that you have found valuable that you can then return to. um, and to reference Meditations as a book that you can just think that you can read and then you're done is ridiculous, because
Yeah.
I haven't finished Meditations, but I read it all the time. Like I just flick through it and find a passage or a couple of
Hmm.
lines, and I think about it. I haven't read it cover to cover because I don't believe it's a book that should be read cover to cover. I don't know. It's not a narrative. It's not a
Hmm.
book that's a story. It's like a set of um,
Notes.
compilation of notes of an individual through his personal diary. I don't think it's one of those books, similar to Tim Ferriss's books, Tools of Titans and Tribe of Mentors.
Hmm.
It's not really a book that you read from cover to cover. It's just like, okay, what interesting piece of information can I find that can help me with what I'm going through now? Um, yeah, Meditations is an interesting book. No, I wouldn't really consider it a book that you read. It's a book that you reference. And I think that's
Hmm.
important to understand. There's books that you read and there's books that you reference. Um, that's why I think Ryan Holiday's books are so great, because they are a book that you can read around a subject that other books just reference. Like he
Hmm.
really contemporalizes, I don't think that's a word. He puts into contemporary format the what Marcus Aurelius or
Hmm.
Seneca or Cicero or Epictetus was trying to say. And I don't consider myself a stoic because I'm religious, but I like finding the similarities between different forms of thinking. That's just where my interest lies.
And well, you say that you do not consider yourself a stoic, but do you apply stoic principles into your life?
I think, given the fact that I'm religious, there's a lot of overlap.
Hmm.
There's incredible amount of overlap, and for me, it's interesting because I read a book recently called The Map of Knowledge by Violet Moeller. You can just see it there. It's basically a book about 7 ancient cities and how knowledge formed in those 7 cities. So it talks about Baghdad in Iraq, Alexandria in northern Egypt. It talks about what does it talk about? Toledo in Spain. I
Hmm.
think is it Seville in Spain? There's another one in Spain. I think it was Seville, perhaps not. Palermo, Salerno in Italy, and Venice in Italy. So it talks about 7 ancient cities and how knowledge spread from the year 500 to the year 1500. And it was interesting for me to read that because I'm like, well, when did religion form? When did Stoicism or other philosophies form, and how have they become intermingled through the process of information being exchanged and languages being translated from Arabic to then Greek to Latin to then European languages like Spain and Spanish and Italian? In that book, she talks about the Latinization of Arabic scriptures. So the idea that in Arab world they were very at the forefront of science and astrology and astronomy, and in the process of translating that information from Arabic into Greek, they basically changed the names of the individuals from Arabic names into either Greek names. So then when the Western Enlightenment came out in the 1800s, a lot of individuals thought that it originated in Europe, where it actually originated in the Arabian world, which to me is fascinating, because then that throws out into, okay, is Western democracy really Western or is it Arabian? Which is a whole different thing. And I had her on the podcast and we were talking about it. And that to me is fascinating. Like that to me, I could talk about that stuff all day. Like that to me there's no time frame on something like that. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but stuff like that is truly fascinating to me. I think we're talking about Marcus Aurelius and the Stoicism. And I like finding parallels between different forms of thinking. So, okay, what is in Stoicism? What is in religion, whether they be Judeo-Christian or Islamic ways of thinking? And where are the similarities? Because my idea is, okay, where is truth? Like where does the truth lie? So if the truth lies in similarities between different forms, that to me is more of an indication that it's truth. Like Stoicism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Buddhism as well talk about how life is suffering. So I'm like, well, if they're all saying that life is suffering, if Viktor Frankl is saying that life is suffering, if Carl Jung is saying that life is suffering, if Friedrich Nietzsche is saying that life is suffering, if David Goggins is saying life is suffering, I'm like, there's a lot of people that across thousands of years that are saying life is suffering from different backgrounds and different cultures. Life must be suffering. So let's find better ways to combat that and become better for it, which is the sort of the approach that I take to learning, is finding the parallels between different people, and then I can find I call them universal human truths, which is like, okay, what are the systems that govern human behavior that I can use really, in order to understand what it means to be a better person, and not to just say, okay, this is better because it comes from this school, but is this better because thousands of years of history has backed it up with evidence? That's why I like reading books that are thousands of years old or hundreds of years old, because if they've been around, have you heard of the Lindy principle? The idea that if something has been around for a certain period of time, then there's more chance of it being around. Ryan Holiday talks about it in The Perennial Seller. Great marketing book. One of my favorite marketing books. If you're creative, then you definitely need to read the Perennial Seller. In that book, he talks about the idea that if something has been around for 1,000 years, there's a high chance it'll be around for another 1,000 years. So with Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, it's been around for thousands of years. So the chance of being around for 1,000 years is very high. So it's important to read those types of books rather than perhaps a book that's just come out a week ago, because there's more value within it, because time has tested it. And my focus really over the last couple of months is switching away from books that have been written immediately in the last few months to then try, for personal reasons, not for promotion reasons, to understand things differently in a different perspective, which I think as a reader, as a curious reader, I think it's incumbent upon you to understand. Every single book that's being published now is a reference to what's come before. So why would you not read something that is hundreds of years old if everything you read now is referencing it? Like, what is the source? Like, what is the source of all the things that are being published? That to me is like, okay, where are the groundbreaking books? Like, for instance, one book that I read a couple of months ago, which was Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, which came out in 1975, that talks about the introduction of the television and how it changed the definition of truth in American society. That book has shaped many books that have come after it on the same topic. That's why I read it. So
yeah, like what you say about well, how I see is knowledge or wisdom is compounded, because after someone read Meditations, he wrote a book, and after someone read the book which was based on Meditations, he read both books and then wrote his own book. And yeah, it is compounded. And I also like the idea of universal truths, Because have you read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle? Well,
Haven't read any of his books. I need to read his books,
yeah,
Emiliano. I haven't read any of them.
yeah, I would suggest A New Earth. And in there, one of the things he talks about is that beliefs are not the truth, but beliefs point to the truth. And I think it's sort of
Yes.
what you're saying when philosophies overlap, when the beliefs of those philosophies overlap, it's probably because that's the truth. And well,
Mm,
I want to ask three brief more things before wrapping up. And
sure.
the first one is something I am curious about, which you talked about, and it is suffering. So, what has been like your what have been your learnings around life is suffering, or how do you personally see that?
So I want to say since the end of 2018, I've been experiencing many setbacks, whether they personally or whether they be familiarly, um, many, which I don't share, and I don't think you need to share them. I think some people will like to share them. I don't share them as an individual because I don't think it's important. But what I've learned from it is the fact that, that principle that this too will end. I think it's a Stoic
Hmm.
principle, but there's something in Islam that's very similar as well, and how the importance of patience. And if I've taken anything out of that principle in my own experience, is that patience is the most important thing in anything that you believe to be important to you. Now, it's important to caveat the fact that patience doesn't mean not doing anything. Patience means it's like, okay, what you're going through is difficult, but it won't last. Are you doing everything you can today to make sure that you're better and the situation is better, but you're not sacrificing any personal principles along the way? That is very important to me because you can easily sacrifice personal principles to get out of a situation, but then you end up being a person that you don't want to be. That's what I want to avoid. That's why you read a book like Ego is the Enemy, because there's loads of individuals through there that have given up what they would believe to be their personal principles for financial or status. Bernie Madoff being one of them. That, for instance, just they're not around anymore. No one knows him. No, he's considered to be just a footnote in history as someone who was a crook and a thief. So don't sacrifice personal principles for any type of gain, whether it be financial or otherwise. I think people think that success is just financial, but I think some people forego what other people would do for power and status. So know what your vice is. I think that's very important. Know what your vice is. If your vice is money, be aware of that. If your vice
Hmm.
is status and power and putting one up over someone else, know that you need to know yourself and who you are as an individual. Um, know that and be patient in the knowledge that it won't last, but also make a daily commitment to be better than you were the previous day, because that's the only way that you're going to get out of the situation. And also have knowledge that there's always going to be something that you're fighting against. There's always going to be something. And I think having that knowledge is very important. Going back to that concept of life is suffering, every day you get up, there's always something. There's always going to be something. And I think something that I've learned is I was naive previously to the fact that a lot of people that I would consider to be successful, and I know there's many ways to define that, have everything worked out. And the moment I realized that no one has anything worked out, and even the ones that you respect the most, sometimes are just winging it to the best degree. And when you know that, I think it gives a lot more perspective on your own personal suffering, and that you can get more perspective on what you're trying to achieve and have a bit more of a longer time frame. And then that sort of sets you up a bit better and gives you a bit more contentment in the short term.
I heard about the idea of this tool passed in a new earth, and I like it. I relate patience with presence,
Mm,
and even right now, enjoying this conversation, or in a moment in which I am stressed, or in a moment in which I am in danger or anything, it's like this tool pass, and I bring presence, and I even sort of enjoy most moments, and that is something that I learned from a new earth.
definitely. And I would also say something to add on to that is the fact that understand what you can and can't control. if there's something you can control, then make sure you're doing everything to solve it. If there's something you can't control, then don't worry about it. There's no point worrying about it. I think a lot of time people get stressed because they focus on things that they can't control, and they focus all the time or intention on it. But really, there's only a couple of things that you can really control on a daily basis. That's you, your actions, your output, and how you treat other people. That's really it. So just focus on that stuff and just let the rest fall where they may, because you don't have
Hmm.
control over it.
And about knowing yourself, do you think it is important? Because by knowing yourself, you also know what you can control, and then you can be proactive. Or
I think the image that you have of yourself changes over time. So I don't think you can know yourself holistically, but I do
Mhm.
think you can understand who you are at that given moment. And that's why I think constant reading, constant writing. I'm a big advocate for writing by hand, just because I think it's a better form of. Jordan Peterson talks about it. He's like, to write is to think. You can't think just by your thoughts. Like, you have to write it down, and
Mhm.
handwriting is the best form of it, because you can type quicker than you can write by hand. So if you're typing something, sometimes you can think something, you can write something down without having thought about it. So when you're writing by hand, you can't write quicker than you can think. So by writing by hand, you're more clear in what you're trying to say, which is something that I've tried to do a lot more, is actually write by hand, whether it be blogs or thoughts or content ideas. Do everything by hand with a fountain pen. Seems to work very well for me in clarifying everything. So yeah.
Mhm. And well, my last question before my last question
Mhm.
is, yeah, we have talked about like which books you read, but I would just like to know, how do you actually apply books and avoid falling into the trap of just reading for the sake of reading, and then even feeling bad because you have read about feeling good? Or I don't know if you get what I mean.
I didn't understand that last bit, but I understood what you said before that. I choose books that only interest me. So if there's something that I can learn from it, whether it be so there's two real reasons why I read a book. Is the first one being if it interests me, like if it's a
Hmm.
topic that interests me. For instance, uh, you know, the siege of Constantinople in 1453. That just interests me. I want to read more.
Hmm.
Um, that's why I read it. Or if a book is answering a specific question that I'm trying to look for. So if I want to establish better habits, or I want to establish a certain type of habit, then I'd read Atomic Habits. If I want to read a book on productivity, I'd read Deep Work by Cal Newport. If I want to understand how to grow a more resilient mindset, I'd read Grit by Angela Duckworth, or I'd read Mindset by Carol Dweck, or I read Goggins, or, you know, if there's something that I can learn from, or if I'm interested in it. And it's great if they both combine. And if it's interesting and I can learn from it, I'm like, well, this is great. Happy
Hmm.
days. If a book doesn't interest me, I won't read it, even if it's considered to be required reading. And I'm like, who determines it to be required reading? Like, who? Like, there's not some oracle out there that is of all knowing information that tells you you shall read all these books and you shall
Hmm.
become me. It's like, it doesn't work that way. So read the books that interest you, which is one of the sole reasons why most people don't establish reading habits, is because they read books that don't interest them. Just read books that interest you.
Hmm.
If it's fiction, romance, go for it. Do it. Whatever floats your boat. Like, I don't particularly care. But read books that interest you. And from the implementation part of it, I think it's important to understand what your system is. When you read a book, I have a very specific system. I'm sure you've perhaps have seen the video or not. I talk about how I take notes. I talk about it all the time now. I think the most important thing from it that I've found is have principles after reading that you're looking to implement. So I talk about 5 principles. You might see it on my channel, right? I do reels on 5 principles I've learned from certain books.
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
think that is the most important thing, because that's your step after finishing the book to then implement it. If you miss that step, I feel like you've finished the book and then you forget it 3 months later. I think you really need to condense what you want to take away from the book into principles, so that you can remember the book and the principles inside of it, but that you can also implement into a routine. For instance, you said with Atomic Habits, for you, it was identity level change, which is really important. For me, it was environmental design. So how can you design your environment to best suit the goals that you're trying to achieve, whether that be setting up your gym equipment or putting your notebook on your table before you go to sleep. Things like that is really important. So yeah, that's really it. I think on that point, when it comes to choosing books, I think it's really important to understand that. Yeah.
Okay, so principles, basically, and actually applying them, not just having them.
Do you know what? I think Ray Dalio's book, Principles, another book that I wouldn't say is a book that you'd read from start to finish, but a book that you can reference. He recommends at the end of that book to write your own principles, and I actually recommend that to anyone listening. And something that I do as well is I have written my own document or library, or whatever way you want to define it, of principles that I hold by, or ones that I like. So that's really important as well, is write them for yourself. And I think that's probably one critical thing, is you have to reframe the book into your own perspective to get value from it. You can't just read it and expect to get value from it. You have to take notes, you have to write about it, you have to talk about it. You have to reframe the book into your own perspective in order to learn from it. You can't just accumulate it and then expect to remember it.
I think that Ryan Holiday has a box in which he collects his notes from well, his reflections from what he has read. Well, just one last question, which is the one that I always ask. And my podcast is called The Transformation Journey, and I ask, how do you define transformation, and how do you approach it?
Transformation is an interesting topic, because I just said that the fact that you don't know who you are really, and who you are changes over time. So transformation for me is an interesting concept, because I don't believe that you can truly know who the person that you are, but I do believe you can know the person that you want to become. Which is that concept of identity level change that James Clear talks about, but I know Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot, is have an ideal that you're trying to chase. And the ideal is not someone that is real. It could be just a fictitious idea of who you want to become, but always seek to become that ideal. And I think that's really important, is everyone has an ideal that they're trying to chase, and always have that in mind. Now that might change over time, but if you're aware of who you're trying to be, I think transformation becomes a lot easier. I think a lot of people struggle to transform when they don't have clarity on why they're doing it. Once you have clarity about why you're doing something, it becomes a lot easier to transform. So my view for transformation is start at the ground level. It's like, okay, why are you making a change? Is it to achieve this? Is it to become this? Is it just because you don't like who you are at the moment? Which goes back to this thing about how you should love yourself for who you are, which I am a vehement opposement. I don't think it's the right mindset. I think at the moment a lot of individuals are saying you're fine just the way you are. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't like who I am. That's why I want to become better. It's such a ridiculous mindset. So yeah, transformation comes once you understand what your flaws are. Become friends with that. Don't become burdened by your flaws. Be friends with it, know it, and then find systems and processes that help you to become better. And that takes time and patience, but books are your friends. So make friends with those books.
Great. Well, just one more thought that I just had about the thing of loving yourself. I I started to reflect upon the topic after reading The Mastery of Self by Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. And I think that loving yourself is, yeah, like accepting who you are right now, like sort of to be in peace, but also accepting that there is a part of you that can be better. So it's like, yeah, loving who you are, but it's not like, okay, I love who I am and I stagnate. It's like I love who I am, and who I am also includes who I can be. So I grow, I transform into that identity, or that's sort of how I see to also be like in peace and fulfilled.
It's that, for me, it's that dichotomy between understanding who you are as a person, but also who you can become. So it's understanding both those threads. I mean, I'm in the school of Mr. Goggins, unfortunately, in this respect. I think that I think it's important to be self-critical of yourself at all times, and I think sometimes it can be difficult because you don't want to become self-critical and not have a system to get out of it, because then you're just negative self-talk, which is not important, which is not good, or it's just not, it's not good. What you need is negative self-talk that then transforms into positive action, and that's where feedback comes in from people around you, but also most people know what they're doing wrong, but they're just avoiding it.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, have an idea about what you're lacking in, seek to fix it.
Yeah, well, Aun, thank you for coming. Where can people find you? Is there anything else you want to mention?
Where can people not find me? God. Yes, you can find me on Instagram, 1 Minute Book Review. You can find me on Book Talk Today, which is the podcast I do every week with authors. You can also find me on my personal YouTube channel, Aun Abdi. I'm trying to do more stuff on my personal YouTube. And yes, I think that's all.
Well, Aun, really, thank you for coming on. It was great. I learned a lot, and we'll definitely be reflecting a lot about this and trying to implement stuff. To the business part, to the productivity, to how I receive feedback and then act upon that reflection. And thank you for that.